The following might be the most effective cognitive reframings that hopefully work like a positive brainwashing to your brain and already helped millions of people, on the one hand in studies, but also in psychotherapy. The first one is to understand, and I know it feels different, but the first one is to understand that the exam is not about you. It's not about you as a person. All the tester, your teacher or your professor is interested in is your knowledge. And even not all your knowledge, but only a little bit of knowledge that is relevant for this test, for this exam. So if you should fail, and this rarely happens to people who are very anxious because usually they learn a lot, but if you should fail, does it mean that you failed as a person, or did you just fail in this little area of reproducing some knowledge? Does this mean anything about you being a good or bad person in life? Surely not. The second thing that really helps if your brain understands it is the illusion of transparency. One of my biggest fears when I went into my first oral exam was that the professor might realize how nervous I am, how anxious I am. And this made me even more anxious. But the truth is, there is the so-called, and there have been studies on this, there is the so-called illusion of transparency. So we believe that we are transparent. We believe that others can see how we feel. But study after study could show that this, most of the time, really is an illusion. Take, for example, studies on lie detections. It's really surprising. Many people believe that they can spot a liar. But most of the time, they are not better than chance, because it's not that easy to see what another person thinks. And when it comes to being anxious, it's quite similar. Of course, if somebody is super anxious or super nervous, we get a feeling, well, this person is nervous. But many times we cannot really distinguish how nervous a person is. And in fact, when I was in my oral exam, before which I had a panic attack in the night before, I was kneeling in front of the toilet, I was vomiting, I was crying, I was hyperventilating. And when I went into the room to the professor, I still was shaking. All my body was completely tense. But after the exam, my professor asked me, well, this was your first oral exam. How was it? How did it feel? I told him, well, I was super nervous. It was crazy. And he told me, really? I didn't realize. And I was thinking, what? I was so anxious. I was going crazy. I had a panic attack and you did not realize it. Well, this is crazy. So please be aware of this illusion of transparency, because studies could also show that when people were told before giving a speech that this illusion of transparency exists and their speeches were videotaped and later shown to observers, their speeches were rated better in comparison to a control condition. So if you know the illusion of transparency and now you know it, you tend to perform better. And if you still should say, well, I don't believe it. I think my professor gets it. I think this illusion of transparency, I don't believe it. Maybe there is science, but maybe you still say, my professor will realize that I am nervous and that I'm anxious, and this is horrible. But is it? Is it really that horrible? Put yourself in the position of your professor or your teacher. There are those students who are completely calm and relaxed, and they answer your questions like, well, there are 5 criteria. Criteria number A is this, criteria number 2 is this, and criteria number 3 is this. And 4, yes, there's a 4th criteria. So some students are like completely relaxed, and then there is the other group of students who are more nervous, like, for example, well, there's criteria number 1, then there's criteria number 2, and criteria number 3, number 4, and criteria number 5. So if you are the tester, which of those students do you think is more involved? Who cares more about what he is telling you? And I think the answer is obvious. So for many testers, if a student is a little bit nervous or anxious, it can be a positive sign. Another very effective cognitive reframing is temporal distancing. So if there are only days or hours until your exam, one thought that might be very helpful is, first of all, to think about how you will feel after the exam, which probably will be a great feeling. But you might also want to think about how important will this exam be in like 10, 20 or 30 years? Do you think it will still be relevant? Or if you take the very long perspective and think about how important in your life will this exam be if you are like 90 years old or even after you have died? So who in the world in 200 or 300 years will care about this exam you had? No, after you died, nothing is important. So changing your temporal perspective can be very helpful, and this could be shown in many studies. But another very effective change in perspective is how you view yourself right before an exam. Are you looking through your own eyes, or are you like somebody who sees yourself acting like in the meditation, in which you also try to observe your acting and your thoughts? And I know it sounds crazy, but one easy way to achieve this meditative state is to talk to yourself in the second person, is to change your inner speech, is to change how to speak with yourself. So let's say hours before the exam, do no longer speak to yourself in the first person and tell yourself, well, I'm so nervous, but better speak with yourself in the second person. Like, for example, tell yourself, well, you are nervous and you are anxious, but it's okay. Everything will be fine. You will make it. You are very well prepared. You spent many hours in preparation, and if it now fails, well, maybe the questions were unfortunate. So talk to yourself like if you're talking to a friend, because there are two things that happen. First of all, you are no longer that strongly identified with yourself, and this takes away a lot of pressure. And the second magical thing that happens is that your self-talk becomes more positive. This is something studies could also show. If you talk to yourself in the third person or in the second person, your self-talk will improve. And of course, this also has a lot of positive effects. And the last tip I can give you is it only gets better. As I told you, my first oral exam, it felt like shit. Nevertheless, I went through it and I even got a quite good grade. So even if you're very nervous and at the edge of a panic attack, it still can work out very good. And in fact, and this is another tip, so there are still two to come, reframing your anxiety as helpful excitement is also very effective. So don't try to be calm at all costs, but instead accept that you are excited and use the energy of being excited. Because all this adrenaline, in fact, can be very helpful to make you awake, to make you highly concentrated, to make you really focus on what you want to reproduce or on the problems you have to solve for the exam. So don't try to relax at all costs. I know many people will tell you, well, try some relaxation techniques. Those can help, but right before the exam, if you are very excited, this strategy of trying to calm down might be problematic, because in this situation many people fail and this makes them even more nervous. So accept that you are nervous, accept that you are excited, and use this excitement to perform as good as you can, because you cannot do anything more. Yeah, you can only perform as good as you can in this moment. And then you will see that the more often you will realize, well, in fact, this time I still was a little bit excited, but in comparison to what I felt during my first oral exam, it was fantastic. It was absolutely fantastic. I felt much more relaxed than the first time. So, and this is something studies could also show. So the best way to see those difficult situations that induce anxiety in you is to see them as a kind of therapy. They are, in fact, a really good and really effective exposure therapy. And as I said, the more often you do it, and this is a principle we know from exposure therapy for centuries, the more often you expose yourself, the stronger you expose yourself, the stronger the habituation will kick in, And in the end, you might feel so fearless that you are really surprised. That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you want to know more about the science behind cognitive reframing, or if you want to know more about anxiety therapy in general, feel free to take a look at the website or at the books, and maybe we will see next time. Sorry, it's me again. I just forgot to mention 2 very important things to make the effect of this video sustainable and as long-lasting as possible. The first one is that you might want to watch this video several times to make the cognitive reframings sink into your brain. The second one is to use if-then plans. If-then plans have shown to be very effective in many studies if you want to implement new behaviors. So you might want to use them as well. For example, by telling yourself, if I get a bad feeling in my stomach, or if I have horror scenarios in my mind, then I remember myself of this feeling of anxiety can also be seen as positive and helpful excitement, which actually can help me to pass the exam.